My parents forgot my birthday again. So I took the one thing they loved most. I never thought I would be betrayed by someone I loved, especially not in front of so many people. But there I was, standing in our living room on what should have been my 18th birthday, watching my parents fuss over decorations that weren't for me. The banner hanging across our mantel read, "Happy Sweet 16, Emma," in glittering pink letters. My younger sister beamed as our relatives gathered around her, showering her with gifts and attention for a birthday that wasn't even hers. Her actual 16th was still 3 months away. Meanwhile, I stood invisible in the corner, watching the celebration that was supposed to be mine unfold without me. "Mom," I had whispered earlier that morning, tugging gently at her sleeve as she arranged flowers. "Today's my birthday, remember?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, honey, we'll do something small for you next week. Emma's party has been planned for months." The dismissal in her voice cut deeper than any knife could have. It wasn't just the forgotten birthday that stung. It was the pattern. Every achievement Emma made was celebrated with elaborate dinners and social media posts. When I graduated valedictorian, they posted a single photo and took us to Applebee's. When Emma made JV cheerleading, they threw a party and invited the whole neighborhood. As I watched my sister blow out candles on a cake that should have been mine, something shifted inside me. The familiar weight of disappointment settled in my chest. But this time it felt different, heavier, more permanent. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the way my sister laughed when she caught my eye across the room. Not a sympathetic laugh, but something colder. Something that told me she knew exactly what was happening and didn't care. I had spent 18 years making excuses for them. They were busy. They were stressed. They didn't mean to forget. But standing there, watching Emma open presents, while our extended family pretended I didn't exist, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, but all I could hear was the deafening silence where birthday wishes for me should have been. As I stood there feeling invisible, I realized I had a choice too. I could continue to let this define me, continue to accept being the forgotten daughter, the afterthought, the one who didn't matter enough to remember, or I could choose to change everything. I didn't know how it would unfold, but one thing was clear. My life would never be the same again. The question that burned in my mind as I quietly slipped away from my own birthday party wasn't whether I deserved better. I already knew I did. The question was, will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? In the quiet of my bedroom that night, I found myself reliving not just the birthday that wasn't, but all the moments that had led me here. The forgotten birthday was just the latest wound. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized it was built on a foundation of smaller betrayals, the kind that chip away at your soul so slowly you don't notice until there's almost nothing left. I remembered the time in 7th grade when I won the state science fair. I'd worked for months on my project about renewable energy, staying up late, missing social events, pouring my heart into something I was passionate about. When they announced my name as the winner, I searched the audience for my parents' faces, desperate to see pride in their eyes. They weren't there. "We forgot," Mom had said when I called them from the auditorium, my voice breaking. Emma had a dentist appointment. A routine cleaning had taken priority over the biggest achievement of my 13-year-old life. I accepted the trophy alone, surrounded by other kids whose families had driven hours to be there. Then there was my high school graduation. While other parents snapped endless photos and beamed with pride, mine were busy arguing about Emma's curfew for prom the following weekend. When I walked across that stage as valedictorian, I gave my speech to a sea of faces, but the only ones that mattered to me were looking at their phones. But perhaps the deepest cut came during my college application process. I'd worked tirelessly to earn a full scholarship to Northwestern, my dream school. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I burst through the front door, ready to share the best news of my life. "Mom, Dad, I got in." Full scholarship. I had shouted, my heart racing with excitement. My mother looked up from her magazine briefly. "That's nice, honey." "Emma, come tell us about your day at practice." Nice. The word that would define how my family saw every milestone I achieved. Nice. Not amazing, not incredible, not life-changing. Just nice. What hurt more than their indifference was how they celebrated Emma's mediocrity with the same enthusiasm they should have shown for my achievements. When Emma barely passed her driving test on the third attempt, they threw a celebration dinner. When I maintained a 4.0 GPA for 4 straight years while working part-time, it was just expected. I began to understand that in my family's narrative, I was cast as the responsible one, the one who didn't need attention or praise because I was naturally good at everything. Emma was the one who needed encouragement, support and celebration for every small step forward. I was supposed to be grateful for being ignored because it meant I was capable, but capability and worthiness aren't the same thing. And as I lay there that night, 18 years old, and finally seeing the pattern clearly, I realized that every time I had swallowed my disappointment and told myself it didn't matter, I had been slowly erasing myself. The smaller betrayals weren't just forgotten birthdays or missed events. They were the systematic erasure of my importance in my own family. Each dismissal had built up like sediment, layer upon layer, until I had become invisible even to myself. Can I confront the hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? 3 days passed after my forgotten birthday before I spoke to anyone in my family. I moved through the house like a ghost, observing their routines with new eyes. I watched Emma complain about her homework, while Mom patiently helped her with problems I had solved independently since middle school. I saw Dad beam with pride when Emma managed to parallel park without hitting the curb, something I had mastered on my first try years ago. But instead of the familiar sting of resentment, I felt something else emerging: clarity. For 18 years, I had been waiting for them to see me, to value me, to remember that I existed. I had been a passive participant in my own diminishment, hoping that if I was good enough, smart enough, successful enough, they would finally notice. I'd been playing a rigged game, following rules that were designed to keep me invisible. The realization hit me on Thursday morning as I sat in my car before school. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I pulled out my phone and did something I had never done before. I looked up my family on social media with fresh eyes. Emma's Instagram was filled with family photos, birthday celebrations, graduation parties, casual dinners where everyone looked happy and connected. I scrolled through months of posts, and a disturbing pattern emerged. I was in exactly 3 photos out of hundreds, 3. And in each one, I was partially cut off or standing awkwardly at the edge of the frame, like an afterthought that someone forgot to crop out. But Emma's Facebook told an even more revealing story. Post after post celebrated her achievements, with my parents commenting enthusiastically on every minor milestone. "So proud of our daughter." They wrote under a photo of her getting a B+ on a math test. Meanwhile, my acceptance to Northwestern, with a full scholarship, had received exactly 0 acknowledgement on their social media. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't neglect born of busy schedules or absent-mindedness. This was intentional. They had made a conscious choice about which daughter mattered, and it wasn't me. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I started planning, not planning to endure or to wait or to hope things would change. I started planning to take control. If they wanted to treat me like I was invisible, then I would use that invisibility to my advantage. If they wanted to act like I didn't matter, then I would show them exactly what losing me would cost them. I opened a notebook and began writing. Not a diary entry filled with hurt feelings, but a strategy. I listed everything I did for this family that went unnoticed. The grocery shopping when Mom was too busy, the rides I gave Emma to her activities, the way I handled all my own needs so they could focus on her. Then I wrote down what they valued most. And slowly, methodically, I began to understand exactly how to make them see me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to wait for their attention. I was going to demand it. The question that kept me awake that night wasn't whether I deserved better. I had moved beyond that. The question was, can I find the courage to change my life, or will I hesitate when it matters most? I spent the weekend studying my family like a researcher, examining specimens under a microscope. Every routine, every priority, everything they held dear became data points in my growing plan. And what I discovered was both predictable and perfect for what I needed to do. My parents' greatest pride, even more than Emma herself, was their image. Their carefully curated social media presence, their standing in our suburban community, their reputation as the perfect family with the successful daughter who was headed to Northwestern, and the sweet younger daughter who was finding her way. They loved that narrative. They had built their entire identity around it. It was time to take it away. I started with the college scholarship. Northwestern had given me a full ride contingent on maintaining my grades and completing community service hours. What my parents didn't know was that the scholarship came with something else: flexibility. I could defer for a year, or even transfer the scholarship to a different school in their network. I also realized something they had never bothered to ask about. I had been managing my own college application process entirely. All the paperwork, all the communication with the school, all the financial aid documents, everything went through me. They had been so focused on Emma that they had completely handed over responsibility for my future to me, which meant they had also handed over control. I opened my laptop and began drafting emails. Not angry, emotional outbursts, but carefully worded professional communications. First to Northwestern, explaining that I was considering my options and might need to defer. Then to 3 other excellent schools that had also offered me scholarships, schools in different states, schools that would take me far away from this family that had never appreciated what they had. But the masterstroke came when I realized what would hurt the most. Parents had already sent out graduation announcements to their entire social network, bragging about my full scholarship to Northwestern. They had accepted congratulations from neighbors, co-workers, and distant relatives. Dad had even mentioned it in his company newsletter. They had built their pride around my achievement without ever bothering to celebrate it with me. I picked up my phone and called Northwestern's admissions office. "I'd like to explore my deferment options," I said calmly. "And I'd also like to know about transferring my scholarship to your satellite campus in Colorado." The admissions counselor was helpful, explaining that I had several options and that any changes could be made up until July 1st. Perfect. That gave me 6 weeks to execute my plan. Next, I opened a new email account and began documenting everything. Screenshots of their social media posts, copies of every achievement they had ignored, records of every way they had prioritized Emma over me. Not for some dramatic confrontation. I was beyond needing their acknowledgement of what they had done. I was collecting evidence for something much more powerful: my freedom. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would let them continue to ignore me, continue to take me for granted, continue to assume I would always be there to be the easy daughter who didn't need attention. And then, just when they were basking in the glory of my achievements and their reputation as successful parents, I would quietly remove myself from their lives entirely. No angry scenes, no dramatic confrontations, just absence. They wanted to treat me like I was invisible. I would grant their wish completely. As I finalized the details, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in my life, I held the power. The question that haunted me as I closed my laptop wasn't whether I could go through with it. The question was, will I feel victorious when it's over, or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? The moment came on a Tuesday morning in late May, exactly 3 weeks after my forgotten birthday. Emma was at school, Dad was at work, and Mom was having her weekly coffee with the neighbors. The same neighbors she loved to brag to about her brilliant daughter going to Northwestern. I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open, 3 printed documents beside me, and my phone recording. Everything was ready. The first email went to Northwestern, a formal request to transfer my scholarship to their Colorado campus, effective immediately. I attached all the required documentation and hit send. Done. The second email was to the local newspaper that had featured me in their Student Spotlight section. I politely requested that they print a correction, explaining that I would actually be attending school in Colorado, not locally, as originally reported. I included a photo of myself that they were welcome to use, one where I was smiling genuinely, not the forced family photos where I looked like an afterthought. The third email was the masterpiece, a group message to every relative, family, friend, and neighbor who had congratulated my parents on my Northwestern acceptance. The subject line read, "Exciting update on college plans." "Dear friends and family," I wrote, "I wanted to personally let you know about an exciting change in my college plans. While I'm incredibly grateful for the full scholarship to Northwestern that so many of you congratulated my parents about, I've decided to transfer to their Colorado campus instead. I'm looking forward to this new adventure and the chance to build my independence in a new state. Thank you all for your support over the years. Warmly, Sophia." I hit send and watched the email disappear into cyberspace, carrying with it the destruction of my parents' carefully constructed narrative. But I wasn't done. I opened my phone and called Emma's school. "Hi, this is Sophia Chen," I said calmly. "I need to let you know that I won't be able to continue providing transportation for Emma after June 1st, as I'll be moving out of state for college. You might want to update her emergency contact information." Then I called the grocery store where I had been doing the family shopping for 2 years. "I'd like to cancel our weekly delivery service," I told them. "The family will need to make other arrangements." Each phone call felt like cutting another thread that had bound me to a life where I was invisible. With every task I removed myself from, I could feel their dependence on me, dependence they had never acknowledged, beginning to unravel. The most satisfying call was to Dad's office. His assistant, Margaret, had always been kind to me when I occasionally dropped off his forgotten lunch or picked up documents. "Hi, Margaret. It's Sophia. I just wanted to give you a heads up that I won't be available to help with Dad's work emergencies anymore after the first week of June. I'm moving to Colorado for college." "Oh my," she exclaimed. "He's going to miss having such a reliable daughter nearby. He brags about you all the time." I almost laughed. He bragged about me to his co-workers but couldn't remember my birthday. The irony was perfect. By noon, I had systematically removed myself from every responsibility they had unconsciously assigned to me, every convenience they had taken for granted, every way they had used me without ever acknowledging it. My phone started buzzing around 2 p.m. Text messages from relatives. "Colorado, when did this happen?" "Your parents must be so excited." What a surprise. By 3 p.m., my mother was calling. I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad called. Voicemail again. Then Emma, probably confused about how she was getting home from school. I listened to the voicemails with detached curiosity. Mum's voice was strained. "Sophia, honey, call me back. I'm getting some confusing messages from Aunt Linda about Colorado." Dad sounded annoyed. "Sophia, what's this about Colorado? Call me immediately." Emma just sounded panicked. "Sophia, Mom's freaking out and I need a ride." "Where are you?" I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my careful planning. Everything was in motion now. There was no taking it back. As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a strange emptiness. The plan had worked perfectly, but now that it was in motion, I found myself wondering about something I hadn't considered. Will I feel relieved after this? Or will it leave me questioning everything? The silence in my bedroom that evening felt different from all the silences before. This time, it wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of having burned bridges so thoroughly that there was nothing left but the echo of my own actions. My phone, which I had finally turned back on, showed 37 missed calls and 62 text messages. The digital avalanche of panic, confusion, and anger that had erupted from my family was almost overwhelming to witness. But what surprised me most was that instead of feeling vindicated, I felt hollow. I scrolled through the messages with detached fascination. Mom's texts had evolved from confusion to panic to anger over the course of the afternoon. Sophia, please call me back. I don't understand what's happening. How could you do this without talking to us? Your father is furious. Dad's messages were shorter, more direct. Call now. This is unacceptable. Come home immediately. But it was Emma's messages that cut the deepest. I don't understand. Why are you leaving? Did I do something wrong? Please don't go because of me. For the first time since I had started planning this, I felt a crack in my resolve. Emma was spoiled, yes. Favored, absolutely. But she was also 16 and had grown up in the same toxic system that had made me invisible. She hadn't created the favoritism. She had simply benefited from it. The knock on my bedroom door came around 9 p.m. I knew it would be Mom. Sophia? Her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Can we talk? For 18 years I had waited for this moment, for her to come to me, to seek me out, to make me a priority. Now that it was happening, it felt tainted by the circumstances that had forced it. I opened the door to find her standing there with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a tissue. Behind her, I could see Dad pacing in the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to manage the social fallout from my emails. Honey, she began, her voice breaking, I know we haven't been perfect, but this is extreme. You're throwing away everything you've worked for. The irony was staggering. She thought I was throwing away my future when I was actually the first time taking control of it. Northwestern in Colorado was still Northwestern. My scholarship was still intact. My grades were still perfect. The only thing I was throwing away was my willingness to be invisible. I'm not throwing anything away, I said quietly. I'm just finally making choices that are mine. But Colorado, without telling us, your father had to find out from his secretary that you were leaving. And there it was, the real wound. Not that I was leaving, but that they had been embarrassed in front of others. Their concern wasn't for me. It was for their image, their reputation, their comfort. I looked at my mother, this woman who had forgotten my birthday just 3 weeks ago, and felt a complex mixture of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Anger, yes. Satisfaction that my plan had worked. But also something unexpected. Sadness. Not sadness for leaving, but sadness for what had never existed in the first place. I'd spent so much energy planning the perfect revenge, but standing there looking at her desperate face, I realized something troubling. Revenge hadn't healed the wounds. It had just created new ones. Has revenge really brought me peace, or is there more healing to be done? I spent that night sitting by my window, watching the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood in the moonlight. In 6 weeks, I would be gone from this place, starting fresh in Colorado, where no one knew me as the forgotten daughter or the responsible one, or the girl who didn't need attention. But somewhere between the planning and the execution of my revenge, something fundamental had shifted inside me. The hollow feeling I'd experienced after confronting Mom had grown into something deeper, understanding. I pulled out the notebook where I had originally planned my strategy and began writing again. Not plans this time, but truths I was finally ready to face. The truth was that my parents' neglect had wounded me deeply, but my need for their validation had wounded me even more. I had spent 18 years trying to earn something that they were incapable of giving, not because I wasn't worthy of it, but because they were too limited to see my worth. The truth was that Emma wasn't my enemy. She was just a kid who had learned to accept the love that was offered to her, the same way I had learned to accept being overlooked. She hadn't stolen anything from me. Our parents had simply failed both of us in different ways. But the biggest truth was this: my revenge had worked exactly as planned, and yet it had taught me something I never expected to learn. Making them see my value through pain and chaos wasn't the victory I had imagined. Real empowerment wasn't about forcing them to recognize me. It was about recognizing myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone else's permission to matter. I thought about the girl who had stood in that living room 3 weeks ago, watching her sister blow out candles on what should have been her cake. That girl had been powerful in ways she didn't even realize. She had earned a full scholarship through her own merit. She had been accepted to one of the best universities in the country. She had been managing her own life with competence and grace, while her parents focused elsewhere. The girl I was becoming didn't need them to see that power. She could see it herself. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. As the initial shock of my announcement wore off, my family began trying to repair the damage. Dad apologized for missing my achievements. Mom planned a belated birthday celebration. Emma asked if she could visit me in Colorado, but their efforts felt different now, not because they had changed, but because I had. I no longer needed their validation to feel whole. Their apologies were nice, but they weren't necessary for my healing. Their promises to do better were appreciated, but they weren't the foundation of my self-worth. I realized that true empowerment had never been about getting revenge or forcing them to see me. It had been about seeing myself clearly and choosing to build a life that honored my own worth, regardless of whether they recognized it. The plan to move to Colorado was no longer about escape or punishment. It was about choice. I was choosing to start fresh, not because I was running away from my family, but because I was running toward a future where I defined my own value. Standing in my room, surrounded by the boxes I had started packing, I felt something I had never experienced before: genuine self-respect. Not the desperate need to be respected by others, but the quiet confidence that comes from respecting yourself. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done since this all began. I called Emma. Sophia. Her voice was small, uncertain. "Hey," I said softly. "I wanted to talk to you about Colorado." "About us?" We talked for an hour. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. I explained that my leaving wasn't about her, that the favoritism wasn't her fault, that I didn't blame her for our parents' choices. She cried, and so did I, but they were cleansing tears, not bitter ones. As I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. I was ready to move forward, not because I had punished my family enough, but because I had finally learned to love myself enough. Am I ready to move forward? Or is there still something I need to let go of? The morning I left for Colorado, I woke up before dawn and sat quietly in my empty room, watching the sun rise through my childhood window one last time. The walls that had witnessed 18 years of tears, frustration, and quiet dreams now stood bare, ready for someone else's story. But I wasn't the same girl who had cried in this room just weeks ago. I was someone who had learned the difference between being seen and seeing herself, between demanding love and loving herself, between revenge and true resolution. My parents drove me to the airport. The ride was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of avoidance. It was the peaceful silence of acceptance. We had said what needed to be said. They had apologized, not just for the forgotten birthday, but for years of taking me for granted. I had forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because carrying anger was a burden I no longer wanted. Emma had insisted on coming too. She held my hand in the back seat and I squeezed it gently, a promise that geography wouldn't define our relationship anymore. We had built something real in those final weeks, not the distant politeness of before, but an actual sisterhood based on understanding rather than competition. At the gate, as I prepared to board my flight, Mum hugged me tighter than she had in years. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "I should have said that more." "I know," I replied, and meant it. Her pride was nice to hear, but it was no longer necessary for my peace. Dad shook my hand, then pulled me into an awkward hug. "Take care of yourself out there." "I will," I promised. "I always have." As the plane lifted off, I pressed my face to the window and watched my hometown grow smaller below. I felt no sadness, no anger, no regret. What I felt was something far more powerful: freedom. Freedom from the need to be seen by people who weren't capable of seeing me. Freedom from defining myself by their limitations. Freedom to build a life based on my own values, my own dreams, my own worth. Colorado stretched out before me like a blank canvas. I had a full scholarship, a bright future, and most importantly, I had myself. Fully, completely, unapologetically myself. In my backpack, I carried the notebook where I had originally planned my revenge. But I had torn out those pages before leaving. In their place, I had written something new, a list of goals, dreams, and possibilities. A blueprint for the life I wanted to create, not in reaction to my past, but in celebration of my future. The girl who had stood invisible in her own living room, watching someone else blow out her birthday candles, was gone. In her place sat a young woman who understood that her worth had never been determined by other people's ability to see it. I closed my eyes and felt something I had been searching for my entire life. Peace. Not the peace that comes from others' approval, but the peace that comes from self-acceptance. Not the peace that comes from revenge, but the peace that comes from letting go. As the plane carried me toward my new life, I smiled and whispered to myself the answer to every question that had haunted me. I am ready. And I was. Finally, completely, beautifully ready.